Hello and welcome everybody to this month's edition of The Wellness Policy. We are back. My name is Wai Ting, joined by my good friends Neal Flanagan and Jordan Goodman. Hello to the both of you. How are you doing?
Hello, Wai. How are you doing this Tuesday?
Doing good. Yeah, not so bad. How about yourself, Jordan?
I can only hear in my left ear. I've had these Apple. I guess you have the same. Both of you have the same Apple with the cord in. We've had a good run, but now I only got you in the left ear. I don't know how I feel about
You
this.
really just need one. I mean, it's not like we're not Destiny's Child here.
Speak for yourself, Wai. Yeah, thank you, Neal. I mean, we're working toward it. I think they started with. Did they start with 4 members and they went down to 3?
I believe so. I believe they went from 4 and they swapped 2 out for another 4. One of them dropped out and then became a 3.
Oh,
well,
wow.
we're one step closer today because we are a 3-piece, but today we're adding a 4th. We're going original Destiny's Child today.
That's right. Yes. We are here. We do have a guest for this particular episode, and we're very excited for it because, Jordan, well, what is the topic that we are talking about today, and what can you tell us about our guest this week?
We're calling the topic How to Lead. A lot of pressure for our guest, Brian Wang. I met Brian at least 5, 6, maybe more years ago. Some of you may know, prior to the Wellness Policy, I had a very similar podcast called Chocolate Croissants, similar types of conversations, but more so for a rock music audience. And Brian was someone that I befriended through that community. He was hopped on an Instagram live with me through that platform. And I suppose it's been 5+ years since I last spoke with Brian, but cool dude, an executive coach for startup founders. And I mean, I guess I could just speak as him if we need to.
Here he is, everybody. Welcome Brian to the show, an executive coach who specializes in helping startup founders develop their leadership skills. How you doing, Brian? What's going on?
I'm doing great, Wai. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah.
So Brian, so you are a musician. I don't remember maybe talking about this with you. I see 2 guitars and an amp, at least in your home.
At least there's like 4 others on the side.
Oh wow! Do you play in bands or have you?
I do technically play in a band now. I recently joined a local dad band. So they do a bunch of like local gigs and it's like rock covers, stuff that goes from like 70s to like, modern day. And they do a bunch of like school events and like local town community stuff. So that's kind of scratching the itch for live gigging. And back when I was in California, which is I think around the time you and I connected, I was in a melodic deathcore band for a little bit, which was very, very fun. So, I got to whip out the 8-string for that.
That makes sense. Some fans of this show might remember the episode we had a couple years ago with Matt Halpern, the drummer for the.
I just saw him on Wednesday, during the.
Oh, you went at Guitar Center.
Yeah. The album listening party. It was really, really cool.
Very cool. So my buddy Matt, who I co-hosted Chocolate Croissants with, he's the drummer of a band called Periphery. They have a new album coming out, I believe, in a couple weeks. So Brian, you're still now in New York City.
In New Jersey. So I'm not allowed to say I'm in New York because New Jersey has to. There's a separation between New Jersey and New York. But I'm in the New York metropolitan area. Let's call it.
Okay. Yes, I believe last time WrestleMania was in that area. New Jersey paid for WWE to specifically say New Jersey and not just the New York City area.
Yeah, we are our own state. Yes.
Okay. Very cool, man. So you're an executive coach. I'm gonna play dumb and ask you what the fuck does that mean?
Not a dumb question at all. I get it all the time, and I'll try to keep it simple. Basically, when I'm working with somebody, you mentioned like startup founders. I work with startup founders who are often in this like tricky transition period where they've built some product or service that's starting to work and they've got customers, they've got traction. And now they have to start to figure out, how do I actually build a team and an organization and a culture that can scale this thing, which is a completely different skill set compared to going and like talking to customers and building. product, which they obviously have to keep doing. So as a coach, a lot of what I get brought in for is helping those clients figure out, okay, how do I actually find the right people for my team? How do I set them up for success? How do I build a culture that's actually going to let people do great work and get great results? And there's a lot that goes into that, right? There's all these decisions that got to get made. There's relationships that have to get formed. Agreements have to get created between people. There's a lot of emotions involved too, right? And I know you're someone who really values the understanding of one's own emotional world. So like a ton of, I think, leadership challenges also around that. How do I actually grapple with the emotions of being a leader and having, the responsibility of creating these results for a growing number of people? And so just in practice as a coach, a lot of what I'm helping folks with tends to be around things like, okay, like what is the hard conversation that I'm not having with somebody on my team? Or maybe there's like some big decision that I have to make that I'm split on, and there's again a lot of emotion involved in that. How do I start to work through that so I come out the other end a little bit more clean on making my decision? And how do I manage myself as I'm building these companies? Because for anyone who's gone and built a business or any sort of organization, it's a lot of pressure. There tends to be a lot of anxiety. There tends to be a lot of fear involved in building a company that has large ambitions. And so how do I work through that? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what that actually means and what that looks like.
You teed up a lot for us. I'm sure Wai, Neal, certainly myself, has a lot of curiosity about what you shared there. But I'm also thinking, okay, one theoretically could be a coach for just about anything. So I was checking out your website this morning, I believe dashingleadership.com. I assume no reference to one dashing Cody Rhodes. Do you, by the way, do you mess with wrestling at all? Are you into it? Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, it's funny. I've never been into like wrestling, the sport, but I did start jujitsu a year ago, which is, there's some overlap. My stand-up game and my wrestling are terrible, but that's like kind of the closest I've gotten to.
Okay. All right. Not the farthest from pro wrestling, certainly. So on your website, you mentioned that you once were a startup founder who hired an executive coach. So maybe if you could just share some about that, I guess more so specifically what being a startup founder meant for you in that experience, and then why you sought out an executive coach, and maybe most interesting for me, what you learned about yourself through that service.
Oh, those are some great questions. So maybe just to bring this back, because this is like a lifetime ago, I was running a startup called Photocracy back in New York. And, like the whole mission of the company was to help people take more control of their health and fitness in a way that felt fun, in a way that felt connected with community. And like that was a mission that was near and dear to my own heart. And the way that we did that was to try to gamify it, turn it into like a video game, and make that a much more engaging experience for folks. Because for a lot of folks, they sort of experienced exercise and fitness as a sort of like chore, or more like almost like an oppressive sort of thing. And so, I ran that with my co-founder for quite a while. And for anyone who's ever started a company, they'll tell you like you have no idea what you're doing, right? You're just like learning as you go. You're making all these mistakes. You try your best to get advice from folks around you, either like folks who are farther along the journey, or like the sort of like leadership, like the thought leaders who write about this sort of thing. But when you're like actually doing it, it's a completely different experience. And my personal experience of it was a mixed bag. Like there are these moments where you really feel like you're making a huge difference in people's lives, and you're like, the numbers are looking great, and you're taking off, and like you've got this momentum. And then maybe the very next day something something goes wrong and you're convinced that your company's dead and you got to go find a job or something like that. And so there's this like roller coaster thing that happens when you're running a business, especially the type of business that we were trying to build, which was like, venture backed. We're not going to be profitable for a while. We're trying to go create some core of an asset that can eventually monetize and all that sort of thing. So there's like these growth demands, and so coaching kind of came into the picture because, man, it was like end of 2013 or early 2014. And I remember that was one of the most stressful periods of my life, at least professionally. We'd been running the company for a while, and we just kind of hit this wall. We were like, this thing isn't working. Like we knew in our gut, like this thing that we've built is interesting, but like at its core, it's not going to go the distance. And so with that, you have a lot of decisions you have to make, like, do we completely pivot the business? Do we think we can sort of like iterate our way out of this? Can we try to raise more money for this thing? Can we sell the company? So there's all these questions that, we're starting to swirl, which for me, was really spiking my anxiety. I was just like gripped with terror, like every day. I was like, oh my God, how do I was experiencing a lot of freeze in those moments too. And like, how do I even move forward? And when you have all these questions in front of you, it's easy to cycle between them, right? You like go from one path to the other. You sort of like convince yourself that I'm doing something productive, but really all you're doing is you're in a loop. And so that was on top of the fact that the company had less than a year worth of runway left. We were going to run out of money in like 9 months. And my co-founder was also leaving. So like there's all these other structural things that were happening. Like all of a sudden, like I'm going through a co-founder breakup, which is painful in and of itself. I'm going to be like, on my own running this thing, and we're running, the clock is running. So I was like, it's a lot.
Brian, sorry, if I may, at this point, how many others were involved in the organization?
I think we had eight people on the team at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a fairly small team, but I wasn't like all on my own island. But from a leadership perspective, I was effectively on my own island.
Yeah, and ostensibly responsible for the career trajectory of 8 other human beings.
Correct. Yeah, of course. Like anytime you hire someone, you hope that this is going to be an awesome experience for them personally and professionally, right? You want this to be a great, part of the journey for them. And so that also added to the pressure, right? I'm like, I'm not giving these people the experience that they hoped for when they were signing up and to join this thing. And so, to get into the coaching thing, I remember I was at this founder dinner in San Francisco, and I was doing this like kind of last ditch effort to go talk to investors and raise more money. And I spoke to this woman next to me. We were sitting next to each other in dinner, and we were just like introducing ourselves and kind of sharing our stories. And I was just relaying a lot of this to her, what I just shared with you. She was like, yeah, you sound like you could really like benefit from talking to my coach. And I was like, that's cool. What does she do? Like what does a coach do? Right. I had never worked with a coach before. And she was just trust me, just take a call with her and see if it makes sense. And so I did. I got her contact info. Her name is Anna Maria, and I spoke with her, and she explained a little bit about like what the process was going to be like. And I said, yes, sign me up. I didn't exactly know what I was getting myself into, to be honest, but what I did know is that I needed support. And I think that's also just like sort of been an edge for me in my life in general, just like allowing myself to get supported by others, right? Because there's a part of me that just like wants to kind of like muscle through it, like solve it by myself. And like, I have to be in charge, and I have to be the one who's like getting all this stuff done, and like asking for help is actually sort of a tough thing for me historically. So to just be like, hey, I'm going to entrust you with like all this pressure and stuff that I'm dealing with, and hope that you can help me through that was I think a big deal looking back. And so I spent a year working with her, and it revealed a lot, in terms of my own like personal patterns. Like I was saying earlier, like that tendency for me to freeze when I'm like under pressure, or just kind of just being really in my head, and not being able to notice the emotions that were kind of at play underneath for me. Those were really, really big. Excuse me, really, really big revelations for me, because it allowed me to start to make some different choices, right? Like the more I was able to notice when I was falling into this or that pattern, then I could start to approach whatever that situation was a little bit differently, right? And there's like the term like pattern interrupt, right? So if I can notice that there's a pattern and I understand a little bit about like how that typically works in my system, then I can start to find some ways to get out of that. So that was a huge part of it for me.
And like, would you say, Brian, you had much leadership experience prior to your startup?
I had zero leadership experience prior to my startup. And I think that's the funny thing about startup culture is like a lot of times people find themselves completely thrust into those positions without any prior experience doing it, which is part of what makes it so hard. Because you're like, if you're like someone in their 20s or something, and they like that they happen to build something pretty cool that turns out customers want, that's awesome. But then you're like signing up for this whole other thing when you're taking on a position of leadership, right? And so that was me. That was me. I was just like, I don't know how to recruit people into this thing, and I don't know how to like find great talent. I don't know how to set those people up for success. And so there was a lot of figuring that out on your own, and guaranteed a ton of mistakes made along the way.
Sure.
Yeah.
But clearly you were connecting enough with just even the idea of leadership itself that you decided to dedicate your own career towards it. How did that transition come about?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a great question. I think part of the motivation, actually a big part of the motivation for entering into coaching was the recognition of a couple of things, and a lot of it was just informed by my own experience. I think one is when you are in a position of leadership, it doesn't have to be a startup; it can be in various other contexts. But startups are what I know. When you're in a position of leadership, just the nature of that situation is going to bring up a lot of stress for the individual on an individual basis. And what happens to humans under stress is that they tend to get into their survival modes, and they tend to fall into some defensive patterns that are really important for them, because those are the things that have allowed them to get up to this point. But I think that what tends to happen when you're just stuck in survival mode is, to put it very simply, you're just simply not at your best. But at worst, it can lead to a ton of really dumb decisions, frankly, a lot of short-term thinking, and also cultures and environments that tend to be, at the one end of the scale, pretty toxic, right? I think a lot of folks have experience working in organizations where leaders they're disconnected, they're letting their feelings get way too influential in the process, whether it's like high criticism or outbursts of anger, or the other side of it's like avoidance, not actually being clear about what needs to get done, and so on and so forth. Like, so fear-driven cultures tends to be pretty common. I would say they're probably more common than not. And so I experienced that for myself, like being in a position of leadership. I didn't like how that felt. I was also part of other organizations later on where I experienced that to varying degrees. And so when I look back and I thought like, so like, how is it that I wanted it to be? If I could have made it different for my founder experience, was, could I find a way to not let fear really take the wheel so much? Which is a really hard thing to do, right? Given what I just said, which is fear tends to come up a lot for leaders when they're in those positions. The second thing is, I think that there is a way in which people can, I mean, we have different ways of describing it, but like to bring out your best self is maybe like a pretty general way of saying it. But to lead from a place that is far more based in wanting to contribute to others, and wanting the best for others, and wanting to express love for others in a lot of ways. Like I don't always use this language with folks, but I think that the best type of leadership is based on a love of self, a love for others, right?
Hmm.
And often I don't mean to make it like a pure dichotomy, but I think often it is this sort of choice. It's like, am I leading from fear right now, or am I leading from love? And I think that's relevant for anybody. That's like outside of companies, businesses, professionals. What does it matter? It's like the way that you're relating to your friend. It's the way that you're relating to your mother-in-law or your kids or whatever. That choice is always in front of you, right? And so if I'm relating to someone or a situation from fear, there's going to be a fairly set of reliable, predictable results that come from that. But if I'm relating from love and contribution, then I'm willing to bet that those results are going to be far better for everyone involved. And so going back to this question around like, well, what led me into this is like, when I recognized that that choice was available for anyone, but especially for, like when I thought about what are the things that are driving so much of our modern age, it is these startups. These startups are influencing so much of our daily lives. And I think probably their share of influence is just only increasing. So in other words, like they have a lot of power on modern society and our day-to-day life. And so when I thought about that fact and, hey, do I want a world where more of the world is being shaped by love or fear? Well, it's okay. Like I want to go more and vote in the direction of love. As a coach, this is part of how I can contribute to that, right? Because if I'm working with these leaders and founders who are driving that engine, if I can tilt them more in that direction, then I think I will have done something good for the world.
I'm curious about maybe stitching a couple of things mentioned together. So Brian, you said that perhaps your more dominant survival mode was freeze.
Yeah.
Can you describe in your experience as a leader, what did that look like? Okay, there's some sort of fear, resistance, insecurity, whatever it may be. Your reaction to that, whether you liked it or not, seemingly was to freeze. Does that mean avoidance? Does that mean indecision? Like, what was your experience of freeze in the context of running your business?
Yeah, it's all of the above. If I were to describe it from like an observable sort of thing, like let's say like we had a video camera on me and that like showed like what my actual behavior was. I think what you probably would have seen when I was in those freeze moments is a couple things. One is even just like walking into the office, my energy, like you could just like, I'm not warm with folks. There's like a little bit of like a standoffishness, I think, that you probably would have noticed.
You're describing Neil when I took him to Disneyland a couple months ago.
Lies.
Yeah. Maybe we can dig into that for Neil, but so there's this energy. And then also if you just watch me at the computer where so much of my work was happening, right? I would just find myself in various forms of, you use this word avoidance. So various forms of avoidance. So let's say there's some big decision that really deserves a lot of my attention. Maybe in a more ideal world, I would have gone and taken like 2 hours to really just like sit with a journal or like a whiteboard and just like think the problem through and actually tackle it. But instead of doing that, I might have been like, oh, let me go like respond to these support emails. Let me go, fiddle through like the team's sprint board to make sure that they're doing their thing and all this sort of stuff that would appear productive, but they're just like small little pebbles in compared to like the big rocks that I really had to tackle. And so I think there was like a lot of self-deception in that too, right? There's like, I worked 10 hours today. I must have gotten some stuff done, but did I actually move the big thing forward? Probably not, if I'm being honest. And that video camera probably wouldn't have seen me go, face that particular question, right? So like, to even specifically, I think, one of the decisions that I probably was avoiding was, do I want to go headlong into trying to sell this thing? Could I go completely pivot this business into something where, I retool it, and then try to make it profitable, off of a completely different business model, which would have taken a lot of different decisions and a lot of hard choices. But that, conceivably could have been a thing. But I was basically trying to do all of the things, right? And as you probably know, if you're trying to choose all the things, you're not making any decision at all, right? That's another form of indecision. And so, yeah, I think for me that freeze came out in a lot of different ways, but they were very cleverly disguised as productivity, which is probably one way in which it made it hard to catch.
Yeah. I'm often thinking, just not even often, just right now thinking, like, how many people are watching or listening to this episode right now? And I'm sure there's people tell us it's either informational, it's inspirational, it's motivational, entertaining even, and so on. But I wonder, there must be one person right now checking this out because it feels productive.
Yes.
But maybe at this point for them, it's become a convenient place to hide.
100%.
But it's hard to recognize that because, well, I want to be a leader, so now I'm gathering more information about how to do that without maybe taking the next step of doing. So with that, Brian, what changed aside from, let's say, more insight or awareness about ways you tend to be, to use your language, and maybe this was through the help of your coach, it sounds like, how were you able to start kind of directing yourself more toward this construct of love or service, maybe getting out of your own way, and actually being a more productive, engaged leader?
Yeah, the way you ask that question almost makes it sound like I've kind of like figured that out, and I've gone to that place. And I would say in practice, it's a practice. And it's something that I'm working on probably each and every moment. And so, so it's not that like the fear in a way that manifests for me has ever gone away, that those still exist. I would say there's a couple of things that have really helped me just like on the path, and which there's no end to it. But I think a few things have really helped me. In the beginning, I would learn and pick up some frameworks that were helpful, like even like language like this, like fear versus love, or, understanding like, what happens when someone is like triggered and like the nervous system that's activated and so on. Like that language is really useful. But I think that the thing that's helped me the most is actually being able to get more in touch with my own feelings and emotions. And there's a couple of ways that what comes up for me as I'm describing that is a lot of it just comes down to even feeling my own body, which may sound like a weird phrase for a lot of folks. I think we live in a culture that tends to reward most folks for being like very up in their heads and like logically thinking through a problem. And we'll use language like, keep your feelings out of this thing. You're being too emotional. Let's be rational about a thing, and so on and so forth, which I think has its place. But for me, being able to even just feel the sensation of, let's say, nervousness in my gut, or what is it like to notice when I'm actually feeling a lot of affection and warmth towards a person or a situation, or like even like gratitude. Like people like to talk about gratitude as a practice for wellness, which is amazing, but can often be just like a purely cognitive exercise. Like, I'm going to go in my bullet journal and be like, here's my 5 things that I'm grateful for. Check, I did it. I did my gratitude practice. But one of the things I learned later on in life is gratitude practice, to be specific about it, can feel amazing if you really let it land in your body. If you are taking the time to just like savor the actual sensations that come with the reflection of whatever the object of your gratitude actually is. And so a lot for me, I tend to be someone who's really up in their head, very rigid, very control oriented. And so a lot of, and this is relevant for pretty much every part of my life, marriage, in my life as a parent, in my work, in my relationships. So much of the work for me has been and continues to be, can I actually just drop down and notice what's happening in my heart? Can I drop down and notice, oh, there's fear here. Okay. How can I actually meet that in a way that allows it to like naturally soften and notice my own safety in a particular moment? Um, and none of this has to be like a long drawn out process, and none of it has to feel very woo for folks who like are hearing this language or like, oh, this is like kind of some woo stuff. No, it's just like just on a purely tactical level. Like, is there a way in which I can be with my own body so that I can let my nervous system settle and let my emotions run through me in a way where I can come back into a grounded place? And then from there, there's a lot more wisdom on how to approach whatever challenge is in front of me. So yeah, that's a little bit of kind of what came up for me, but I think I'm losing track of the question now.
Well, what you sort of described seems incredibly universal and not really just applicable to leadership, but like any sort of highly stressful situation. Like what you're talking about sounds very similar to maybe what athletes may describe before they head out to a big game, or in the case of professional wrestling, a big match, right?
100%.
So how much of leadership is simply that, working on yourself and being able to handle your own stresses and emotions in order for you to, well, convey perhaps the best role model for your team?
I would say a huge amount of it is that, right? There's like this idea of like managing yourself, right? If think about it this way, if leadership kind of flows through you as an instrument in a situation, but your instrument's all fucked up, right? It's like, or out of tune, right? To use a musical instrument analogy, then it's not going to come out very good. Right? So yeah, I think especially in any performance-based endeavor, professional sports, pro wrestling, whatever it is, I mean, that's why performance coaches exist in those arenas, right? Like there's so much about, can you have your mindset in the right place, right? How is your self-talk, right? The way that you talk to yourself has so much to do with your inner state as well. Can you find resources internally that allow you to feel confident, remember what you're capable of, and even like visualizing success it's kind of like almost like a trite thing to say, but it really works, right? Because we're orienting our mind and our attention on a thing that we're really wanting versus like all the terrible things that could go wrong, which I don't know about you, but if I'm just spending all my time thinking about all the ways in which I could be failing or something could go wrong, then one, I'm going to feel terrible. and two, I'm not going to be on top of my game if I'm doing that.
So when people come to work with you, I'd imagine they're not at the jump saying, "Hey, Brian, my self-talk is kind of fucked up." But they're saying something else about the difficulty of running their business.
Right.
Does anything come to mind as a typical jumping off point? Hey, I'm seeking executive coaching and this is why.
Yeah, great question. I would say, yeah, there's a couple of I think entry points that tend to come up when someone's like, "Hey, I want to go hire a coach and get some support." One tends to be on the interpersonal. What I've found is that interpersonal stresses and conflict tend to be where the vast majority of stress comes from for a lot of folks. It's probably no surprise why so many people in startup land now are just talking about automation and agents, because it allows them to like not work with as many humans because humans are busy. But I would say interpersonal stresses and conflict tend to be a huge thing.
And just to clarify, by that you mean like colleagues not getting along, maybe you not getting along with a colleague? How do you
I'll get more specifics. It's like my co-founder is underperforming and I don't know how to talk to them about it, right? As an example, or there's more maybe like a generalized thing of like, hey, I don't have people around me that I can trust, and so like when I try to delegate stuff, it kind of falls through the cracks, and so like I'm always having to like do all the work because I don't have people around me that I can trust. And so those two examples tend to be pretty common. And then there's maybe like the third one that tends to come up is like, I don't actually know where I'm bringing my company. So there's like a vision issue there where there's like, I don't actually know what I'm trying to create right now. my strategy is all messed up, and it's really hard to lead from that place, right? Because you're like, I don't actually know what the goal is. How am I supposed to go to my team and tell them what to do? Because I'm telling them to go like move off in this direction that I don't even like, I'm not even sure about, but I gotta go tell them something, right? And so, and again, that's still related to people, right? It's like, how do I relate to people in a way that like creates clarity for them? And so, I think that we were talking a little bit about emotions, but the interpersonal side of things is where a lot of the emotions tend to come up. And there's and the other thing I'll mention, by the way, is like we talked about self-talk. There tends to be a ton of just self-doubt, and people like to use the term imposter syndrome. I tend not to use that term, but like some sense of like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I need to get this right. Right. So a lot of perfectionism tends to come in there too. I need to make sure I'm under control. And therefore, like that's going to manifest as like trying to like do a million things at once and try to do them all perfectly. And so, when someone is gripping on like, white knuckling through it because they're just like, that's the only way I can actually go like run this company, because deep down, I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm terrified about it. That's not necessarily how someone's going to like describe it on day one, right, Jordan? But it is something that tends to come up with a lot of my clients. And so when I'm working with someone, often when I notice that, I might think to myself, like I wonder what would help this person in feeling a little bit more at home, a little bit more grounded in what they're doing. Or I wonder, like, what is the thing that they're really, really scared about that needs attention right now? We talked about avoidance, right? So if they're not actually facing the thing that they're scared of head on, then that thing tends to run them, right, in a certain way. And so a big part of my job is just to like notice and track, like what's going on for my client. What am I noticing in their behaviors? What am I hearing them say? What am I hearing them not say, right? Which tends to reveal a lot.
What's your beef with the term imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it's a good question. We sort of I think we tend to frame it as like this negative thing. But the reality is, again, from my world, as in startups, the reality is most people who are like taking on the title like of CEO or founder or leader or whatever, like they are imposters, right? Like just straight up, right? Like they like by definition, they have not done this thing. And so I think there's like some almost like this like stigmatizing thing about the term imposter syndrome. It's like, oh, I don't want to have imposter syndrome. Like, oh, what does it mean if I'm an imposter? Like the reality is that like that is what you are. You might as well embrace it, right? And can we just get clear on the thing that you don't know or you haven't done, and let's work with that. So that's my beef with imposter syndrome. Is like people sort of like they're just like, oh, like I can't believe I have imposter syndrome. It's like, yeah, we all do, bro. It's okay. Like let's work through that.
Who doesn't start off as an imposter? Nobody is.
By definition. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so your more sort of like philosophy is to embrace it and not look at it as such a negative thing. So how does somebody deal with imposter syndrome?
How does someone deal with imposter syndrome? That's a great question, Wei. Yeah, I think step one is, and this is relevant for I think most things, it's just like face the reality of it. Right? Can you accept the fact that you have not done this thing before? So why would you ever expect you to be good at it? Right? Like you're like just doing this for the first time. And then depending on the situation, there's a few things I would say. If it's a situation if it's a challenge that is kind of like a known solved problem, meaning like, yeah, other people have solved this before, right? Like there's like some playbook, there's some way in which you can learn from others. Like go learn from those folks. Like there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, right? And so, examples of that are, oh man, I've never managed a person before. I don't know how to give them feedback, or I don't know how to run a meeting with them to give them, to like do a one-on-one with them. Hey, good news. So like, there's like literally like thousands of books and resources on that topic. So let's kind of figure out like what tool or framework would be really, really useful for you there. And then we got to practice that. Right? We got to like implement that. We got to go like see how it goes as you are trying that and experimenting in the real world. And so, yeah, going back to like, how do you solve imposter syndrome? Well, it's like with anything, it's like if you're developing any skill in any domain of life, you got to go figure out what is the skill you're trying to build, and then how do you start to practice that? Like, how do you come up with a game plan and then practice that, repeatedly, and then learn from that, right? Get feedback from the system, and then learn, hey, what went well, what didn't go well, what can I learn from this situation, and how do I, what's the new thing I'm going to try next time, right? And so, at its core, I think at any moment you're trying to learn, you got to create a learning loop there. And so that tends to be more on like the tactical side of things. And then, yeah, I think because imposter syndrome tends to also be very much on the emotional side, this like fear, this doubt, or even like self-criticism around not doing a great job and so on and so forth. There also just tends to be some work there too, right? So it's like, okay, if there's fear involved on trying to do something for the first time, I'm never going to go tell someone like, don't be scared about it. It's like, okay, like it's actually normal. Like it's actually perfectly reasonable for you to be scared about this thing. Great. Let's just like accept that reality. And how do we want, like, what needs to be true for you to allow the fear to soften a little bit and like just take the next step. Right. And sometimes that might mean just like drawing out a really specific game plan. Right. Or it might be something a little bit deeper. Right. So a lot of times when people who they grow up in environments where like they had very strict parents and they had to get things right all the time, and like they had, maybe they had critical parents, a lot of times it's really not safe for them to fail. Right. They maybe grew up in environments where if they had any whiff of weakness or failure, like they were just severely punished. And so that tends to create a lot of patterns around not just anxiety and fear, but shame tends to be a big thing as well. And so if I'm noticing that someone is starting to show up in an environment or situation where there's shame involved, right? What tends to be important in that moment is like, forget the frameworks and the tools, like that stuff is really useful. But a lot of my job at that point is like, how do I help this person bring more connection and compassion to themselves? Because that's what they need right now, right? Because I can notice like they are really beating themselves up, and they are really gripped by this like internal monologue or dialogue of like, oh, I'm not good enough in this particular moment, and that's freezing them, right? And then the issue on a tactical level is like when you're frozen around that, it is going to cut off any chance of you getting good at the skill, right? If I'm approaching a situation where I'm just like constantly in this grip of shame and criticism, like my window or my capacity to learn is really compromised, right? So sometimes if I'm noticing that as a coach, then I might want to say, hey, like I think there's something else going on here. Let's see if we can explore that a little bit, right? And how do we start to notice when I'm in a moment of criticism and shame, and how do I start to work with that so that that starts to get a little bit more resolved, right? Sometimes it's just like mere presence. It's like, oh, like noticing a person like has a lot of fear and shame around this thing, and how do I help them just like be with that in a very compassionate way, right?
Yeah.
Neil, feel free to elbow your way in. Sorry, Wai. I'm genuinely curious, and maybe this isn't the type of person that would more routinely seek out coaching, but do you ever experience maybe it's pulling at the opposite end or the flip side of the coin of imposter syndrome, like someone who's maybe a bit too overconfident or ignorant of their capabilities to their detriment or the detriment of the business or the organization that they're leading?
Yes. Oh man, I love that question. And so the answer is yes. I've definitely run into folks who show up in that way. And there's a couple of things I will say about that. One is that's just another side of the coin of fear, right? When you're like trying to perform and you're trying to convince everyone that you know what you're doing, that's just like a shield against vulnerability, right? Like that's like a shield against like ever having gotten anything wrong, right? And those types of people also tend to be very good talkers. They tend to be very skilled at convincing people and selling, which is an incredible superpower. They also tend to be very good at not accepting responsibility for things that go wrong because they're just like, they're very, very good at talking a big game and being able to frame things in specific ways. And so, again, all of that at the core, it's just deeply unhelpful in a lot of ways because it can mask reality. So if a leader is making decisions that are having like an adverse effect on their team, but they're never willing to actually own that, and they'll just like owe it to other external forces, then they'll just keep doing this thing that is causing people to like be unclear about what the job is, or not be motivated, or not be aligned, or whatever it is, right? And so as a coach, it can be tricky to catch, right? Because sometimes, like when I'm working with someone, I'm only meeting them once every 2 weeks, maybe once every week, depending on the situation. So like that's 1 hour out of 168 hours in a week. A whole lot of stuff is going on, right? In between. And so structurally, I have a very limited aperture into what's actually going on. And so if I hear that, you can learn a lot from someone based on what they're complaining about, right? So when they're complaining, oh, my team is not performing very well, as an example, that's always something that I want to get curious about. Like, oh, tell me more. Like, what are you noticing that's going on, right? How are you behaving in this situation, and how are people responding? Like, I'm just like asking a whole bunch of questions and trying to understand like what is the dynamic, understanding that like they're probably going to be an unreliable narrator, as we all tend to be. But like, I want to just like piece together, a little bit more context, right? And then I'll just be tracking it. It's like I'm tracking it over time. It's like, okay, how is that evolving over time? As we're iterating, as we're trying new things, what are they learning? What are they seeing? And, sometimes I'll just get a gut sense like, it sort of seems like this person is kind of way over their skis, right? Like they're pretending to know something that they don't. Or they're kind of jumping into something in a very unskillful way. I have to always hold that very loosely because, again, I'm not in the room with them. So I might offer that, right? I might, especially as I've built trust with someone, I might say, hey, is it possible that, the way you're approaching this situation or this person is actually contributing to, their underperformance, let's say, right? And we might need to get specific about that sort of situation. And a lot of times they'll be like, no, I think it's something else. Okay, great. We'll move on. Or maybe they'll notice, oh, wait, there is something I'm doing here that's contributing to the situation. And so this is a sort of thing where I think every coach loves to, have that moment where like, oh man, like this person has like this huge aha moment, like light bulb, holy shit, like, wow, like I finally see this like big moment of clarity. And that happens sometimes, but a lot of times it's more like, there's like, you're sort of like opening the door, like you're inviting them to look in it a little bit. And they're like, maybe yes, maybe no. And the next time it comes up, like, you open it a little bit more, right? And then like over time, as this sort of data builds, right, then it's like there's like a body of evidence that collects that says like, I think it's unavoidable. We need to take a look at something a little bit more closely. Now, the last thing I'll say on this, and I'll pause, is that whole process I'm describing, honestly, it takes more time than it should. Like that whole thing could take months. So one thing that I also like to do with clients is just like run assessments like off the bat, right? If they have like, let's say 15, 20 people on their team and they're growing, that means there's like a lot of people who like have a lot to say about that particular leader. And so one way to make that process way faster is just like go get a whole bunch of 360 feedback. 360 feedback just means like you're just getting peer feedback and coworker feedback from a lot of different sources, like all around you. And I'll get them to have like written questionnaires and surveys, recorded interviews from a whole different bunch of stakeholders, and then I get to go take these like 10 different perspectives and assemble it and synthesize it into something that really just holds up a mirror for the leader. And it's like, hey, here's the way in which you're showing up, and here's the way in which people are experiencing you. And here's probably some recommendations on what to do. But that tends to be a really productive conversation because then like, whoa, like people got really honest, and like there's a bunch of stuff that I didn't even know I was doing that now I want to address.
Brian, I've got more of an observation, really. Hopefully, that it leads to a question. Is that I feel somewhat the odd man out here, out of the four of us, because I'm among a bunch of creators and self starters, whereas the vast majority of my career has been in as an employee within rather a structured organization. I work in government, not on the political side, but on the sort of easing the way for the politicians, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so, like a lot of those public sector organizations, there are rule books, there's an HR department, there are policies, there's all of that. So I'm surrounded very much in my day to day by professional managers who have, I suppose, the equivalent of what the Americans tend to call an MBA, but you know, they've been to business school or they have those sorts of degrees and so on. And my experience of that, sometimes at least, is what you have is a straitjacket. People who are who know how to follow the rules, who can who know what the policy is to deal with certain things, and in some cases are very good managers, but are lacking in the creativity department, are lacking in the ideas. Whereas what I'm imagining, and you can correct me, is that in the startup world, and you know, Wai, you know, he has a co-founder. A lot of what you were saying sort of leads me to Wai because he's a co-founder of his own enterprise, you know, and it's a creative one. Are the ideas people, and perhaps learning a lot of the nuts and bolts of management is something that has to come along later.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, does that ring true for you in the people that you coach? Are they all, for the most part, creative minded and have to learn a little bit of the boring stuff? Or do you have sort of the technocrat people that I'm talking about who know the nuts and bolts, but really are sort of chained in their little box?
I love that question because what it brings up for me, Neil, is the fact that like these different sectors tend to almost have like different centers of gravity and different like cultures, right? Like cultures of like what gets rewarded and what gets punished. And to answer your question directly, yeah, I would say most of the people I work with tend to be more on the creative side, right? They're entrepreneurs at heart. And so they never necessarily set out to manage people. They had an idea. They saw, a way in which the world could be better in some specific way, and they built something that turned out to be actually really, really valuable for some folks. And so, I think the spirit there tends to be one where there's more risk taking, and it's okay to fail. I don't think people use this phrase that much anymore, but you know, like it used to be this phrase of like move fast and break things in startup land. And so that I think is emblematic of like the attitude, right? It's like we're here to change the world, and that means we're gonna like go move really quickly, and we're gonna make a lot of mistakes. And there's like a cultural DNA in that. That allows people, it gives people permission to like mess up, right? And like look stupid in public, right? And like go do all this stuff that like feels very audacious. And then some percentage of those people will actually be successful. And then some percentage of those people will then need to start to figure out how to do the management stuff, right? And so when I don't know anything really about how government and public administrations work, but I would imagine that it's sort of the polar opposite, where you're sort of where startups in some ways are trying to like risk maximize, right? They're trying to like try to find risk because that's where the reward is. Whereas with government, like a lot of it's, I'm guessing, is like let's risk minimize. Let's make sure that things are under control. Let's try to figure out like what could go wrong and account for that. I would imagine that the people who are kind of like getting rewarded are the folks who like where stuff just doesn't go wrong on their watch. And so yeah, I think in that system you're again speculating that you're going to be rewarded for knowing how to manage a bureau, a process, a group, some sort of playbook, if you will, on how do we address these sort of things. It's all very structured. And I think that's super valuable, by the way. Like it's incredibly needed, right? Like we don't want government to be like going doing crazy experiments all the time and failing, right? Like that's affecting like millions and billions of people, right? So I think there's a place for both. But I've met people who have been in like large companies for all their careers, and it you can't help but absorb that DNA when you're in that environment for a long time. And so I think one of the things is that I notice is if there's someone in that world who wants to go to the other side, if they want to be more entrepreneurial, it can be hard because they have sort of been conditioned to be very like risk averse and try to maintain as much stability as possible. Which I don't think that was your question, but just one of the things.
Oh no, it absolutely touches on what I wasn't sure myself what my question was. One of the things that springs to mind during your answer is, watching from across the other side of the Atlantic, someone who, whatever you think of him, and I'll save my opinions to myself for the moment, in the shape of Elon Musk, clearly a very successful entrepreneur, if whatever else he happens to be, but injected into government, it felt like that whole Doge experiment seemed like a disaster, so I think all to say that there's a place for both, and probably the middle is somewhere in the middle is where you want to be, where you can be a professional manager, but at the same time open to new ideas, open to creativity, all of that, because that's something in my personal experience I find lacking. And that's why something like post wrestling and podcasting gives me that outlet for creativity.
Totally. Yeah, on the thing around Elon and Doge, not to get too far into it, I'm going to say this with the acknowledgement that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this. So just, I want to give that caveat. And it's not like Elon needs my advice, but my sense of that situation is that I'm someone with the opinion that there's a lot of efficiency gains we probably could get in government. Like there's probably a ton of waste, a ton of inefficiency in there. I think that's probably indisputable. My guess is that with Doge, there was a failure to actually understand the environment they were walking into and just like figuring like, yeah, we're just going to bulldoze everything, right? We're just going to go like smash this entire thing. And that's where like real positive change is going to happen. If you're someone who believes that there was a real positive intent there, not everyone believes that, but if you believe like, oh, they were trying to actually create real gains here for the good of government, for the good of people, they probably should have understood the system they were walking into a bit better. They probably should have understood the culture they were walking into a little bit better, and then figure out how do we adapt our process in a way that pushes the ball forward without breaking too much stuff and actually gets people on board. The flip side of that is like you're probably going to get a ton of resistance, and you probably would have had the argument of like, well, no one here is going to actually agree to what we're trying to do, so there's no point in engaging with them, which I can see in that side of it as well. But my sense is that I'm sort of an incrementalist at heart, right? So Neil, when I hear you say like, oh, I live in this world, but this podcast is my outlet, my entry, right? I think that's amazing because you have this way in which you can channel that, and you can progressively channel more of it if you want into this direction, if you like. It's up to you. But there's like a respect for like what's important to you. And same thing is like if you're trying to change a system, if you're trying to change like a massive system, you kind of need to understand the field that you're working with. So anyways, that was kind of like the first thought I had in that.
Brian,
go ahead.
Do you think anybody can be a leader, or do you think certain people are born into this and more capable of this than others?
That's a great question. There's a couple of responses I would offer to that. One of the things that came up for me is like there's like some idea out there like everyone's a leader, right, in their own life, and a leader is not a title, right? There's a way in which we're leading other people all the time, which is true. I subscribe to that idea. I think we have so much influence over the people in our lives and we don't even recognize that. And so, to the extent that we can impact other people, move them in a certain direction or another, all that's true. But for the purposes of this conversation, if we're talking about the idea of like someone leading a group of people or a team, I'm just going to keep it to that for a second. This question of like, can anybody be a leader? Yes, technically, yes. But I want to offer a caveat, which is there's going to be the question of do they want to be a leader? Which I think is really, really important, a really important question to investigate. And do the conditions support them to actually become a great leader in that specific context? So let me just like address that one by one. I think what I've noticed for a lot of folks, they find themselves in positions of leadership and they kind of figure out over time, like it's not for them. They just don't get energy out of it. They kind of hate it. For a lot of folks, especially folks who are really deep in their craft or they're builders, they love building new stuff. They have a lot of ideas. They can often end up in a situation where they're like, oh man, like I don't spend any of my time doing the stuff that I love. I'm spending all my time in meetings. I'm like, I'm talking to all these people and I'm making plans, I'm setting goals and I'm, da, 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 da. And like, they're doing anything but the thing that they love. And they notice that they're not getting a lot of energy out of that. And so a lot of times like they need to renegotiate what's going on in their day-to-day so that they get that energy back. And sometimes that means like they just don't want to be in that position of leadership anymore, which is totally fine. And there's also folks I've met who are just like, they just from virtue of like their personality and how they're wired, they just don't want to be in a situation where they have to manage people at all. And they totally dread it. And that's great. Neither is right or wrong. It's just like you need to know that about yourself, right? So can anybody be a leader? Yeah, sure. Like you take someone long enough and help them develop the skill. I do think they can get there, but there's a question of the desire and how fulfilling is it. The second question of also just like how much time do you have, right? So if you're building something that's like on a clock, like, right? Like in startups, like oftentimes you're going to run out of money in like, 18 months or something. Does that startup have enough time for you to become a truly great leader? It's kind of depends on the situation, right? And so, this question of like, can anyone? Yeah, 100%. But then I think the more important question is like, do they want to? And does the context support them in making that shift?
Yeah. Jordan from Canada, so as the username goes, in the live chat here on YouTube saying, I think leadership is a skill that people can learn, as Brian is saying, if they really want to. I tend to agree. So I think a lot of it just comes down to the self-awareness of this is or can be part of the role or the responsibility, and then understanding, look, some people are more naturally drawn to being a people person, of interacting with people. I'm one of those people. I've been put in positions of quote leadership in certain ways, and I would compare myself to others even higher up in the organizational hierarchy of leadership that I was quote working for. And it was very obvious to me that I seemed way more interested in engaging with and cheerleading, even supporting the people, that the human beings that were working to achieve my mission of the day. And I guess I got at the time, this was pre-COVID, I got really interested, curious, observational about this construct. So I'll present it. And Brian, I'm wondering if it's something that rings true for you, if it's even a conceptualization that you chat about with your clients. So I was working for a wrestling company, and this wasn't like a Vince McMahon or now a Tony Khan type of wrestling company where it was very entrepreneurial. This was a pro wrestling company that was owned and operated by a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. And the wrestling company was a very small piece of this larger organization. So my management, the leadership, culturally came from the more traditional MBA corporate route, we could say, or culture.
Right.
And that was my first time experiencing that sort of culture. And I kind of had one foot within leadership, I had projects and people I managed, but I was also managed by the leaders above me. And just culturally, I'm very different than the people that were managing me. So for me, it was a very awkward fit that I tried my best to adjust to, at least. And, a year plus into it, I had a lot of frustrations. So I requested multiple, sometimes hours long conversations with my GM. And the conceptualization I essentially presented to him was, from my perspective, I feel like as a GM, you have two main kind of domains to generally manage: the business and the people within the organization. And I had some issues, and so I'm wondering for you, Brian. Like, again, I don't come from a more traditional world. I never thought to get an MBA or to get like formal education in business, essentially. But like, I'm wondering, are these things that are like plainly acknowledged? Is this like 101 stuff that if you're going to be a quote business leader, then you have a business you can run, strategy, product, etc. But then also you're managing the human beings of the organization. From my perspective, like if you're going to take on both, then do both well if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that is a conceptualization. I'm wondering for you, like, is this like, yeah, Jordan, of course, or are people not so much taking this into account that to lead means or could mean leading multiple things at once?
I want to answer your question, but can I ask you, what was the thing that was really frustrating you about that situation?
I'm trying to be kind in a public forum.
Sure.
But people skills and I think consideration or acknowledgement of human beings day in and day out contributing to the business. And my take is that if you pour into them, they'll pour better into the business.
Yeah. I 100% align with that view. And to go back to your other question around like the domains, I think that what I notice is most people they agree with that view. Like you're meant to like manage the business, you're meant to manage the people. I think most people would say yes, that's the job. Now, whether or not they take that seriously is another matter. And I think what you're describing tends to be the thing that I see a lot, which is like we're managing the business and the people they're not quite incidental, but they're kind of like cogs in the machine, right? Like they're the resourcing. We have this term human resources, right? Like they're the resources that like go and make the business happen. And there's like this on the extreme end, you can sort of view humans as like these like just like people who are meant to like receive instructions, and it's all very mechanical. And like if I just tell them what to do, then they'll do it. And like going back to earlier, like let's leave the emotions out of it. Why do I need to pay attention to these people? Why do I need to give them appreciation and praise, et cetera, right? And so I think that it fails to account for the fact that human beings have needs. They work in certain ways and no one is exempt from them, right? Like we all have a need to have a certain sense of self-worth and respect. We have a need for connection. We have a need for recognition by peers. Like that is a very real and important thing that we all have. We have a need to be recognized for our contributions. We have a need for feeling like we're doing a good job, right? To feeling like we're contributing, to feeling like we have autonomy, right? Like no one is exempt from these needs, right? And so when I think in the example that you're citing, when people like kind of underinvest in that, or they sort of underappreciate those specific realities, then what you often end up seeing is people who are pretty unhappy working in those places. You probably see some turnover among the employees. And some managers never quite figure it out. They never quite figure out that the way I'm treating others has something to do with my quote unquote people problems. And so that's where I think a lot of folks can benefit from recognizing that, like, the more the more you can be a human, right, in these situations, the better. And I think the professional class can sometimes sort of be like, no, we're going to be very buttoned up and professional, which I think is just to everyone's detriment.
So, like, my experience of higher education is in clinical and counseling psychology. So, in that program, I received a lot of education around the different clinical theories and techniques, and I got experience doing this stuff and so on. There was just about no education about the business of the field. Okay, you have these skills. Now, how do you make a living utilizing these skills? I assume you don't have an MBA, Brian?
I don't, no.
Okay. Are you aware, though, for an MBA program, typically, is it mostly theory and techniques about business, or is there something more central to this is how to effectively relate to and manage other human beings?
It's all of the above. I think specifically in the MBA thing, this is based off of people that I know. It can really vary depending on where you go to school.
Sure.
A lot of them tend to be some of them tend to be very like, okay, here's like management theory. Here's how are we going to build a financial model? Here's how we like manage these financial statements and, or set vision and strategy and all that other stuff. But then there's also some MBA programs that are really, really great about the more human and interpersonal side. So one program that comes to mind is Stanford's MBA program, Stanford GSB. They have this one class that's famous. It's called interpersonal dynamics. They colloquially call it touchy-feely. And it's widely regarded as like one of the most popular things that people do when they go through Stanford GSB. The whole idea behind interpersonal dynamics is they kind of spend a whole semester in this like learning environment where people are interacting with each other in this really raw and authentic way, where they get to share their honest thoughts and feelings with each other as a window of gaining more self-awareness, noticing how you're impacting other people, and how other people are impacting you, and then like taking all that material and then learning what to do with it, right? And so that's a great example of something that I think more people could use, because like at the end of the day, that like this whole separation between business and people, I think, is artificial, because at the end of the day, what is a business except for the people who are building it, right? These businesses don't spring up out of nowhere. They get created by human beings, and then more people join to go like grow the thing. In a lot of ways, they are the same thing. Now, look, in the AI age, like that's changing in a lot of ways, but I think ultimately, like, we are us humans, like, we're building businesses because we want other humans to care about the thing that we're doing. We want to add to their lives, and we want other humans to be part of our teams to make this sort of thing happen. And so I don't think there's actually that much of a separation between those two. But I think that the thing that you're identifying, Jordan, is this like is some belief that I don't need to care about my people in order for my business to succeed. And I think that can be really dangerous. But yeah, just one last note: this thing around like, getting trained clinically, but not knowing how to like build a business is another gap, right? Like that's another thing that I think is also challenging. It's like, oh man, I really wish. I would imagine if you come out of that, you'd wish that like they at least gave you some time spent on like, how do I actually build a practice now? Like that probably would have been useful too.
Yeah, well, I'd assume for 99.9% of people, investing in that education, it's then to make money utilizing those skills and the education.
Right.
Yeah, common sense, one would think. Brian, in the work that you do, when do you feel most alive and engaged and yourself?
I love that question. A couple of things come up. One of the things that really makes me feel alive is when I'm able to challenge someone in a way that puts them on their edge, but there's been enough trust built in the relationship where I'm allowed to challenge them, right? So if I call them out on something, right? Maybe it's maybe they're talking about an interaction they had with like a teammate or something, and if I call them out on like the ways in which maybe their approach caused some problems or something, but they know that I'm on their team and they trust me, I trust them, but I'm making them uncomfortable because I'm like, kind of telling them like, hey, like I think this thing that you did was not so good, right? Just not so many words. There's like a charge there, right? You're like, oh man, someone's like I'm telling them something uncomfortable that maybe no one else is going to tell them. And so I know for me, like I can feel like, kind of nervous saying that sort of thing. Like, am I going to say this thing that's maybe uncomfortable? And then when I finally say it and like it's like received well, or maybe not so well sometimes, then that there's definitely an aliveness and an electricity there.
Mm.
The other thing that comes up is going back to this like whole question of aliveness is, yeah, it's like when I'm helping someone work through something on the deeper end, right? So this tends to come up in situations where like they're working through like a strong, inner critical voice, or there's a really strong emotion that's like really stuck right now, and like they're like not able to move forward on whatever the thing is because of that. And so there's these moments sometimes where we get to really slow down and really like I can invite that person into noticing like what's actually going on in their internal process, and can we find even just a little bit room in that situation so that they can start to connect better with that, whatever that dynamic is, be more present and build more skill there. Now, I'm not a therapist, right? So I want to be really, really clear about that. This is not about me like helping someone heal some like, long-standing childhood wound or something like that. But there are moments where, we can drop into like a more present state that allows someone to actually get more regulated in that moment and actually start to see a thing that is really active and recurring for them, that as we explore it and as we kind of work with that in certain ways, they find significant relief, and they start to, I use the term pattern interrupt earlier. They start to find ways to pattern interrupt down the line that I know like once we start to touch that, like they're going to start making some different decisions. So that's one that also comes up for me.
Brian, you used to have a podcast. Or I say used to, I mean, it's still up there, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're still currently working on it. But, since this is more of a podcast audience, you do have several episodes that are up there. Care to maybe discuss your podcast?
Yeah. So it's funny. I was just talking to someone else about this. Technically, it's on hiatus, and so I started this podcast. I think it was 2024. I think, and the part of what inspired me to put it together is because, um, I've been working as a coach now for many years, and I've also just been in startups for a long time. And rarely did I ever see um, a lot of overlap out there in terms of just like content that people can check out, right? Like there's tons of podcasts and YouTube channels out there about one or the other, more on the startup side. And there's like, there's like the thought leadership stuff. There's like, oh, like let me go interview a founder or a CEO about their experience building their billion-dollar company and all the lessons learned and the war stories and all that good stuff, which is really, really useful. But what I noticed was there was a gap in being able to like watch someone work through real life stuff in the context of a startup, right? And so the original notion of the podcast, Slow Down to Speed Up, was what if I took real founders who are working through real life issues that are active in their lives right now, and just have a one-time coaching session where we're actively working through the process, and hopefully we can help them get a little bit of forward momentum on that situation. And so I think we've done, what is it saying, 22? Yeah, about 22 episodes. A couple of those are like solo episodes, but probably like more than a dozen folks have come on to it. And it's a really interesting experience, like you guys know this, or you guys do this podcast, and you don't know how it's going to go. You don't know where it's going to go, and what's going to get brought up. And anytime I'm working with somebody in a coaching capacity, I don't know what's going to get brought up. But then when you're doing it where it's recorded, that kind of, like inevitably changes the vibe, right? Like I notice I'm being recorded. They notice they're being recorded. There's a little bit of this like, ooh, how much are we going to like perform or hold back in that situation? And I think it just like, I don't know how you avoid that. I think it's just something you have to sort of factor in. But it was an interesting experiment for me because I wanted to see, could I actually create anything that was useful and valuable for folks who are listening or watching it later on. And I have gotten people like coming back to me like, hey, like I watched these 2 episodes, like they were really, really valuable. Like they were really relevant to what was going on for me. And so thank you for creating that. And that has always been really, really nice to hear, right? It's like, oh, it's like, anytime you put something out in the world, you have no idea who it's going to impact. So to get that sort of feedback is always really, really gratifying. That being said, one of the things I learned about making a podcast is that I don't get a lot of joy and energy out of it. So that's why I'm sort of, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is sort of on hiatus, because it's like, I'm not going to be the next like big, podcast on Spotify, and nor do I want to be. And so I'm glad I like ran that experiment for about, I don't know, a year and a half. I don't know if I'll continue making episodes, but it was definitely a fun run.
But it is still quite the catalog that is up there with, I would imagine, tremendous insight for many people who might be seeking topics like the ones you described. So that is available for people if they want to find it on their podcast apps, or also on YouTube at Dashing Leadership, which is also where you can find all of Brian's work. You can get in touch with him. Anything else you would like to perhaps discuss about where people can find you, Brian?
Let's see. You can find me on my website, like you said, dashingleadership.com. I used to be pretty active on X, formerly known as Twitter. I haven't been super active on there so much anymore. But my email's brian@dashingleadership.com. Give me a shout. Twitter, Instagram. I'm kind of easy to find. Username is just Brian M. Wang on all those platforms. And yeah, I love meeting new people. And if I could be helpful to folks, that's always great.
Where's your next Dad Rock show?
I think it is at a local Irish bar next month.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that, Neil.
Yeah, there you go. Neil knows what's up.
What's on the playlist or set list?
I have to check. There's like a band leader who's like organizing all the set lists and all that sort of stuff. So I got to.
By the way, is not being in a band, like, I mean, trying to lead a band, is that not perhaps a great sort of way of seeing leadership at work, or maybe fail?
Especially in this particular context, because I'm in a weird band situation where the band itself is a little bit of a weird one, because it's like there's like 25 guys in it or something.
Wow.
And so like, you've got like 5 guitar players and 3 bassists and like 3 drummers and like all these vocalists. And so like the band leader,
Dad Rock.
Yeah, I know, right? But we're not all on stage at the same time. So like they just got this like big spreadsheet like on Google Sheets, and like for all the songs, they've got to like mark off who's going to be on which song. And they like assemble the set list based off of who's available for the upcoming gig and all that sort of stuff. So that it is a big job for the band leader. I will say there's a lot of leadership skills going on that one.
No, lovely. Thank you so much for sharing your time, Brian. And you can find him at Brian M. Wang. You can find him at dashingleadership.com. And hopefully those who listen gain something out of this conversation.
Totally.
Jordan and Neil, any closing words?
Just
thank you, Brian.
To Brian.
Good to see you, dude.
Great seeing you guys too. Thanks for having me. It was really a lot of fun.
Hell yeah, man. So was it just hosting podcasts kind of sucked the joy But like, I hope this wasn't brutal for you today.
No. Being on here was awesome. Getting to just like talk randomly is a joy for me, man. It was like the production and like coming up with the name and like the caption or the subtitle or whatever it is, and like promoting it, like all that sort of stuff that I was just like not super into.
Well, so if you're kind of observing what I do here, what I was doing with Matt and my brother Justin, co-hosts help. Way's good with the technical stuff.
There you go. This goes back to the part where I was talking about getting help from others.
It's a big part of leadership, is it not? So next week, we are actually going to be off from the wellness policy, and we will be back in the month of June, right, guys?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Topic
With the
TBD.
biggest episode yet.
By what metric?
Well, we already had the most handsome guest in Brian.
Maybe in mass. Maybe we'll all just like gain a ton of weight, come back, and we will weigh ourselves.
Cultivating mass, as they say.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's our May goals.
Okay, everybody. Thank you all for listening, and I guess we'll check in with you guys in June. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.